Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Oxygen for the Soul. This week's Pasha is Perashat Haye Sarah. And the Pasha begins with an interesting conversation about the legacy of Sarah. We know that this week's Pasha is a part of a cliffhanger from last week's Pasha. Abraham walks up to Mount Moriah. He brings him all the way up to the Temple Mount area, and he's asked by God to offer him as a sacrifice. This is certainly a difficult task for Abraham, no question about it, because he's been preaching his whole entire life that this human sacrifice is wrong. But yet somehow he finds the courage and the strength to overcome the challenge that God puts him in, and he goes through it. The Midrash says that when Abraham was bringing up Yitzchak, the Satan came and appeared before Abraham as an old man and said, maybe you misunderstood God, trying to do everything and anything in the Satan's power to stop Abraham from going up and offering his son as a sacrifice. And then he realizes Satan can't work it with Abraham. He tries with Yitzchak. He comes to him as a young man, says, maybe your dad got it wrong, maybe he's hearing things, maybe he's senile. Are you sure you want to do this? And he can't deter Yitzchak. Yitzchak and Abraham succeed. As Abraham is about to offer up his son, God says, he sends him an angel, says, stop, don't do this is not what God wants. And that's where the story ends last week. And this week, the Parsha begins with the following words. Very, very powerful, profound words. It says, Ve'yu Haye Sarah me'ah shana ve'esrim shana ve'sheva shanim shnei Haye Sarah. Sarah's life was 127 years. The years of Sarah's life were all equal. Ve'esrim shana, she was, it breaks it down. Me'ah shana ve'esrim shana ve'sheva shanim. You don't really write someone's age that way. You just write me'ah ve'esrim shana. You write me'ah ve'esrim v'sheva or sheva ve'esrim shana, but you broke out every single one of those numbers in that 127 in the verse. And this bothers Rashi and the Chachamim, and they basically point out that there's a lesson here because Sarah was not just some woman. Sarah Imenu wasn't just some woman that lived her life. She made everything meaningful. She lived a life of equanimity. She was someone who was a beautiful. The word V'yu is a palindrome. You could read it forwards and backwards. Vav, Yud, Hey, Yud, Vav. V'yu. She was a balanced human being. And that kind of a person, she is someone who takes her life with her. Now, I want you to think about Sarah. She was a brilliant, fierce, powerful, brilliant woman. She's someone that inspires Abraham, and so much of Abraham is really an expression of Sarah's guidance, right? Sarah inspires Abraham to be the best version of himself, and now Abraham loses his best friend, his wife. And the question is, how is that possible? And I've shared this idea before, but I think it's worth reminding. It's worth resharing the idea today very quickly. When Abraham is going through that task, that impossible task that I know that everyone else would probably fail. I would fail, you would fail. Who would want to go ahead and try to sacrifice their son and not think they're absolutely insane? When Abraham brings up Yitzchak, right, and he's about to slaughter him, the Midrash tells us that the Satan brings Sarah to see the event. And as a result, she dies. Okay? Now the question is, how is it possible that she passes away? Wouldn't she have been strong enough? Wouldn't she have been inspired by the fact that her son and her husband were carrying out God's will? More than that, we know that Sarah Imenu was a greater Neviah. She was a greater prophet than Abraham. How do I know that? When Sarah tells Abraham, I want you to send your concubine Hagar with her son Ishmael, right? What does he say? Abraham says, no, I can't do that. I'm chesed. I can't throw out a woman and her child. Hashem comes to Abraham and says, Shema b'kol ishtecha. Keith, remember those words. Shema b'kol ishtecha. You got to listen to the voice of your wife. Right? And we see from there that Sarah was greater than Abraham and Nevuah. That's what Rashi says over there. So then my question is, well, why does Sarah die? She should have been inspired the same way Abraham was. And I'm sure there are lots of answers to this, but my quick, short answer is that it wasn't her test. And that the second she tried stepping into Abraham's shoes, she dropped dead. That in reality, the tests that we have in life are the tests that only you and I can accomplish. You could accomplish your test, I could accomplish my test. And the second I try to go ahead and pass off the challenge, right, that, I wish I had that person's, challenges versus my own, right? You're going to fail. You could only overcome the tests that you have in life. Stop trying to trade them off for anybody else. The tests that you have are yours and yours alone. They're designed to make you great. Okay, Sarah, for whatever reason, she tries to get into Avram's shoes. Boom, she drops dead. Okay, so Pasuk continues and says as follows. It says, V'tamat Sarah b'Kiryat Arba. She dies in Kiryat Arba, and that's Hebron, the same Hebron today. Be'eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan. V'yavo Avram l'spod l'Sarah ul'bichta. He comes to go ahead and to eulogize her and then to cry. Which is interesting because typically when you're going to eulogize someone, you first cry and then eulogize. And the Chachamim point out over here that Abraham finds out along the way. He's crying the whole. He's doing the whole thing. He's on the whole path. He is crying and he is sad, and he recognizes at this point, which is so difficult for him, that he has no place to bury his wife. He has a son who's 37 years old who's not married, and all the things that God had promised, they're so far from becoming a reality. And he's wailing here. He lost his partner. V'yakom Avraham me'al pnei meto v'yidaber al bnei Chet. He goes ahead and he comes to the children of Chet. This is days already. She hasn't been buried, and he wants to bury Sarah in the land of Hebron. And there's a pushback. You all know the story. You should definitely read it. And eventually they concede. He buys the land of Hebron for a ridiculous sum of money, an inflated price, and he ends up burying her there. Okay. The Torah goes out of the way to tell us that this is Hebron, and this is all happening in the fields of Mamre, who's one of the guys that helped him, with the circumcision and whatnot. So his name is mentioned, and so on and so forth. Okay, he ends up burying her. End of the story. Pasuk says as follows: Va'Avraham zaken ba beyamim, and Abraham is old, and his days are coming with him. Hashem berach et Avraham bakol. God blesses Abraham with everything. Okay, so Abraham is clearly worrying about time, right? He's getting old, and time is running out. So he says, "Vayomer Avraham el avdo zaken beito hamoshel b'chol asher lo simna yadcha tachat yirechi." I want you to know that I'm getting old already, and I want you to take a vow. I want you to promise that you're lo tikach isha livni mibnot haknani. Don't find a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, right? Ki el artzi ve'et molati telech. I want you to go back to the place that I came from. Go back to go back to the land that I came from, and over there I want you to find a spouse for my son. Okay, and he goes ahead and he agrees. Abraham over here is worrying about legacy. Now, I've used this. I've had this conversation a couple of times. It's worth repeating over here. I found like a write-up of this. This is like one of the most interesting interviews I watched this week with Mike Tyson, who fought against Jake Paul and lost. We all know it was a fake fight. But this is what this young, 13-year-old reporter named Jazzy, right, a black young girl, asks Mike Tyson, what legacy does Mike Tyson want to leave behind? That's a fair question. The whole parasha is about legacy. And I just thought it was fascinating that this girl is asking the question of this week's parasha. What does legacy mean to Mike Tyson? Right? If you haven't watched the interview, it's definitely worth watching it. But this is a quote. Ready? This is a quote from Mike Tyson. I don't believe in legacy. It's just another word for ego. I'm just passing through. I'm going to die, and it's going to be over. Who cares about legacy after that, he says. We're nothing. We're just dead. We're just dust. We're absolutely nothing. Our legacy is nothing. Who the cares about it when I'm gone? Can you really imagine somebody saying, I want my legacy to be this or that? You're dead, he continues. You really want them to think about you? What's the audacity to think? I want people to think about me when I'm gone. Who cares about me when I'm gone? Right? That is Mike Tyson, a 58-year-old man, talking about legacy, right? Now, it's interesting because, he's basically saying that there's no point in legacy. You're here today, live for right now. We are only hedonists. You only think about your wants and your needs, and after that, forget about it and move on, okay? So this is the antithesis of what how Judaism thinks about legacy. Legacy is a profound path that allows you to think about the future, right? Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says that we are the story we tell, right? We are the story we tell. And Haye Sarah is a deep expression that of the storytelling that we're telling. Look at what it's important to Abraham. Think about how he cares, but he wants people to know that how he behaves matters, because he understands that everything that he does is for the future. He's not just living for himself now and it's over. No, he wants to leave a proper example. He wants to illustrate to the world what it means to be a deep, loving, caring human being. And you see this, like he's thinking about the future, right? He purchased the land of Hebron, the first detailed purchase of the land of Hebron, to tell you that that Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, settling the land of Israel, is super important, even to someone who it was promised for him to be for free. He said, no, I'm buying it. I want to have the mitzvah of buying land in Israel. I want every generation to know that I went out of my way and I spent a ridiculous inflated price at a kavod for my wife, and to leave a legacy to my children and my grandchildren about prioritizing the land of Israel, right? And then he goes ahead and he says, my next part of my legacy is my son. He's not married. He's 37. He was 40 at the time at this point. He ends up finding, Eliezer ends up finding through a miraculous process a girl named Rivka, right? A young girl named Rivka. So, Abraham is all about the legacy, right? How do I ensure that my children and my grandchildren are going to be taken care of? I don't want my son to marry anybody. I want him to marry a girl whose values are aligned with my own. Now, it's interesting. You've probably heard the idea that Rivka was very young, right? She was super young, and that he married her when some opinions say that she was 3. Some people say that she was 12. Some people 15. I want to unpack that a little bit. Now, remember, in Judaism, life is it flows in a very interesting pattern. It's like breathing. Sometimes the soul inhales, sometimes it exhales. Sometimes we're alive, and sometimes we're dead. Sometimes the soul has to get back to its source and has to be re-energized, has to connect back to God, and that's what death is. Life is the soul's God exhaling, so to speak, and the soul coming back into the body, inhaling, taking it away. Now, we know from the Mekubalim, from the Kabbalists, that there is a hierarchy to the soul. There are 5 different conscious levels of the soul. The first one being nefesh. That's the most basic level, okay? And that is, that level of nefesh is associated with the physical existence and action. It represents the life force that is, permeates through the body, and it is connected to the world of asiyah, of action. Okay, that is where one's service of God involves his ability to recognize God in everything. Okay, fulfilling all the commandments and so on and so forth. Then you have ruach. Ruach is the second level, and that relates to the emotional self. It's connected to the world of yetzirah, of formation. Ruach encompasses the development of emotions such as love and awe of God. Right? It's a place where you're contemplating spiritual development. Then you have something called neshama. Right? That level represents the intellectual aspect of the soul. It corresponds to the world of bria. Neshama involves the deep understanding and insight into God's wisdom. It allows you to have a deeper, more profound connection with Borei Olam through an intellectual understanding of His world. Then you have something called Chaya, the 4th level, and that is being on a transcendent intellectual and emotional world of atzilut, of emanation. Right? It is the innate awareness that God's life force is all one, that everything is all connected to one. That's what Chaya is. And there's something called Yechidah. That's the highest level, and that represents the essence of the soul. The complete oneness of God. Not just one with the physical world, but oneness in the spiritual realm. All these things are interrelated. Now, what the Mekubalim tell us is that each one of these levels happen at a different stage in our lives, right? That you start out with neshama, and then eventually you're going to get to ruach, nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Those 3 steps. You don't have all 5 at once. And that they say that on your bar mitzvah, you get to ruach, okay? And then, or neshama, depending on how you break it down. And then later in life, you get the other levels of chaya and yechidah. And that, therefore, some opinions will say that when Rivka was 12, okay, she ends up getting the ruach of whom? Of Sarah, right? Because we know that Yitzchak is 37 when he's brought to the Kedah, But he only gets married when he's 40, which means 3 years pass. So according to that opinion, when Rivka was 12, she received this new soul, which was an extension of Sarah's soul. Sarah passes away. A part of her, an essence of her, is now reincarnated into Rivka, because Rivka was young enough where she did not possess that soul. Okay? She matures in a very deep, profound level, which is why Isaac Yitzchak is so comforted by the fact that his wife is truly an extension of his mother. And how do he know that? Because when he brings her into the tent, the cloud that was there, the candles that lit from week to week, and the chalot that were still warm, all happened again in the merit of Rivka. Life comes and goes in stages, right? And it has to be, we have to be individuals that think about leaving a legacy. Mike Tyson, you're wrong. You totally missed out. Every fight, every opportunity you have to speak to the young generations is an opportunity to go ahead and inspire a whole new world of thinking. We need to be thinking more deeply about ourselves. We need to be thinking about how we can elevate the world around us, not make it mundane, not make it about selfish wants and needs and desires and pleasures. That's not the legacy we want to leave. We want to leave behind a legacy of individuals who think deeply about a future, who care about the future, who care about the world. And the only way that can happen is through the humility and through the recognition that there's something called spirituality, something called Kedusha, and that means creating boundaries. It means setting up borders. It means understanding that I can't have whatever I want, whenever I want, that I am not an animal, that I am a human being that has a neshama, and my neshama is eternal, and that there are different stages to my development, and it's okay. Sometimes, I'm not ready for a higher development because my soul isn't there yet. It'll come in time. You and I are not here to finish anything. We're here to be initiators, to be starters. What guides me is what I want to leave behind. Haye Sarah, the whole entire parsha, is a parsha of Avraham, Zaken, Ubaba Yamim. Who's Avraham? He's the old man. He's Zaken, he's got his wisdom, Ubaba Yamim, his days are coming with him. What does that mean exactly? And I'll end with this. When you're getting older, right, you're often thinking about how you regret so much of your past. You don't want your past to follow you. You're thinking about whatever little future you have left. That's not Avraham. Abraham's whole entire life is he's Zaken, he has his intelligence, and he wants his days to come with him because he invested so much time in doing all the things that he did for it to be a story that is told for generations. You and I are having this conversation 3,500 years later for a man who lived his life thinking about his legacy. Our eternal strength comes from our ability to think about leaving a legacy in this world. When our neighbors, our non-Jewish neighbors, are not thinking about legacy, it's our responsibility to inspire them to think more deeply about their legacy. This is Haye Sarah. It deals with the question of life and death. It's about priorities. It's about the legacy we want to leave behind. My hope and my prayer is that each of you recognize that everything that you do is an opportunity to think more deeply about your legacy. How do you want to be remembered? Do you want your days to come with you, or are you going to be embarrassed of your days? Are you going to be the individual that is thinking so deeply and profoundly about making a dent in the world and making a better, greater place? Or are you lost thinking only about the here and the now? Are you giving up because you feel like you can't make change? Or do you recognize that you're put into a test that only you could accomplish? And sometimes it's not about winning the test or necessarily passing the test. It's about struggling through and overcoming as much as you can. Let God do the rest. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom on this wonderful journey. May we go from Mechal Achal, from strength to strength. May we recognize that our actions matter. Legacy matters. What we do and what we say matters. You should be blessed in all your things. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thank you so much for joining.
Shabbat Shalom.